all. Awesome to be in conversation with you. So I am going to ask some general questions, and I would love for anybody to just take them, and then I'll ask more specific ones, and then we'll open it up to the audience for a Q&A. I guess the first question I have is thinking about where we are in 2023 with some folks who are first-time filmmakers, some folks who have been making films for a number of years. Where do you think we are in terms of LGBTQ stories? Is it simply part of the narrative, simply something that cinema embraces? It's not anything new. It's not anything different. Or is there still a niche, for these kinds of films and these audiences? Who wants to take that question? Go ahead, Vuk.
Is this working or?
Yeah. I think so.
I feel like you've made so many more movies and you have so much more to say about this. But it's an interesting question when it comes to transness. I think it's maybe separate, like gay, lesbian, etc., and then trans identities, or I would put them in a separate category, even though I want to be in a position where we're past it being focused on being trans and just being a character. It's interesting. I mean, it took me 5 years to make this movie, to find my lead, etc., and the pendulum is swinging erratically from side to side in terms of politics when it comes to trans identities, so it's hard to separate those two.
Well, I'm going to stick with you because in watching your film, what I thought was so interesting is that it wasn't just about trans, right? It was about kind of I felt like it was about a lot. And it wasn't just about trans identity, it was about identity, I felt like. So how did you decide to make this film, to not just focus on, what it means to be trans?
Yeah. Well, since I don't think a lot of people have seen it in the audience, my movie is called Mutt.
Can you hear Vuk?
No? Yes?
Is there a way to turn it up? Hold on. That was yours.
You want to try?
Yeah.
Let me see, is this one better?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, and maybe speak a little louder
Hello?
if you can.
Hello? Hello? This one's better, right?
Yeah.
I'll give it back, I swear.
Yeah.
Okay. So, what I was saying, now I can hear myself.
Yeah.
What I was saying before, since probably a lot of you have not seen the movie, but you should come see it. It's going to be at New Directors, New Films next month, April 8th, closing film, so come check it out. Thank you. The movie is called Mutt, and it centers around a trans Latino New Yorker who is picking up his estranged father from the airport tomorrow, and over the course of 24 hours, you get to see him interact with his little sister, his ex-boyfriend who he dated before transitioning, and his Latino father who's coming, and is a Latino father. So you get to see trans intimacy, and you get to see him kind of change who he is depending on who he's talking to. So just a portrait of a person that is trans. I hate the term happens to be trans. I hate when people say that, but they're very much trans. So I wanted to create a movie that was a little bit outside of the coming out story. But as a trans person, you can't really escape talking about being trans no matter how many years you've been out. So I think it feels a little bit of a coming out story just because society keeps asking the same questions over and over again.
Right.
What was your question?
No, that's good. Basically, why did you decide to make this film?
Yeah.
So that's great. I want to go to your film and ask you that same question in terms of representation. And you also, that's the thing I thought was so interesting about all these films. They're really kind of universal, even though they're specific in who these characters are. But in terms of representation of drag performance specifically, queer characters, questioning characters, how do you feel that, is this something that, is, that's still niche, or is just part of the cinema, language that we have now?
Thank you. My feeling is that in France, my sensation is that something are changing, but it's still an early beginning. I feel like there has been some place for LGBT authors and great, of course, great movies such as Christophe's movies or Céline Sciamma's movie, which brought great representations about lesbians and gay people and also trans identity stories. But when it's about queerness and, for example, the art of drag, in my case, it's kind of still not very easy to bring it. For example, we didn't have so many problems to finance the movie. We felt like it was kind of a good moment. It happened at the right time for the financial people. But when it went about selling it to the directors of theaters, it was more complicated. Like we have been screened into 60 theaters in all French territory, when we could expect 2 times more, like 120. That was our expectations, but we had to fight against the idea that an LGBT story would not get any audience in small towns, which is not what I believe. And also 3 nights a week. So if ever you haven't seen it, it's about a guy falling in love with a drag queen and discovering the art of drag. And I also wanted to go out from those storylines in which homosexual desire is a struggle, so it's not for the character. The problem is between them is that the drag takes too much space into the drag queen's life. So I wanted the audience to relate with this idea that sometimes your profession swallows you and make you not available for a love affair. So the movie is really inclusive. It was made for the queer people, but also for their families, in order to transmit and to invite people from outside of the community to discover our world. So the idea that a non-LGBT audience would not come is not exactly right for me. So my sensation is that there is a lot of work to do, and I feel like France hasn't really understood yet that there is a market for us and for those storylines, and it's still to be discovered.
Great. Christophe, I'm going to ask you the same question, especially as someone who's been in the business for a while.
Sur la question de la niche, donc. C'est compliqué parce que je pense que nous, en France et aux États-Unis, ou même dans le reste du monde, c'est des questions différentes. Déjà, en soi, le cinéma d'auteur est une niche. Vous voyez ce que je veux dire, quels que soient les sujets en fait, de vos films, que vos films concernent effectivement des populations minoritaires ou non. C'est forcément des films qui, a priori, que ce soit au moment du financement ou en tout cas au moment aussi de l'exploitation, il y a une espèce d'injonction comme ça, comme quoi ça ne parlerait pas à tout le monde.
So it's a difficult question always, because of course whether France or elsewhere there's going to be a cultural particularity. But first maybe to mention that author cinema, what's considered author cinema, is always a bit of a niche. Whether or not you're treating of minority subjects, there is still this injunction that and this idea, whether it is on financing the production or whether later on for distribution, that it's a kind of cinema that's only going to appeal to a specific audience.
Ce que moi j'ai pu voir en fait, je me sens un peu un dinosaure parmi vous, mais ayant démarré, oui, je fais des films depuis 20 ans. En tout cas, ce qui est sûr, c'est qu'en France, la personnalité, l'identité sexuelle du cinéaste, que ce soit du côté lesbien ou homosexuel, en tout cas, j'ai pas l'impression que ça... que le milieu professionnel ou le milieu de la production, on va dire, que cela nous pose plus de problèmes ou moins de problèmes. Moi, j'appartiens à une génération en fait de cinéastes homosexuels où on était très nombreux à être out. Et dans nos films, selon les sujets de nos films, en fait, il y a des personnages homosexuels qui surgissent, on va dire, dans nos histoires. Et j'ai pas l'impression que ça a freiné la carrière de certains de mes collègues cinéastes, que je pense effectivement à Céline Sciamma, à François Ozon, à Gaël Morel. Enfin, en tout cas, le cinéma français me semble être assez... peut-être d'une manière hypocrite, mais après on peut l'interroger, mais en tout cas, ça me semble pas être quelque chose où soudain vous êtes rangé dans une niche.
So I feel like a bit of a dinosaur here because yes, I have been making films for 20 years. My experience is that the sexual identity orientation of filmmakers in France has not, in the professional milieu, been something which categorizes oneself within a specific sort of niche, whether my generation was a generation with a lot of gay filmmakers who were all out, and it so happens then that within the films, I used as a, within the films, a lot of gay characters also, and I don't feel that has hindered the career of any of my sort of colleagues, whether Ozon or Sciamma. Whether this generality or universality is hypocritical is something we can discuss further.
Ce qui a changé, en tout cas, et moi je le vois un petit peu sur mes films, c'est plus la perception. C'est-à-dire que soudain nos films, effectivement, sont peut-être quoique c'est pas vrai. Enfin, moi, mes premiers films, j'ai fait aussi des festivals LGBT comme des festivals qui étaient, on va dire, plus on dit quoi, universels, grand public, ouais, voilà. En tout cas, ce rapport à la niche, à mon avis, est vraiment très très différent. Enfin, à cette idée comme ça d'une présentation particulière des films ou une manière de catégoriser les films sur les sujets. Je pense que c'est quelque chose en fait qui appartient peut-être plus effectivement au cinéma américain et à la perception un peu du cinéma américain qu'en France où on est un peu plutôt noyé dans la masse.
Maybe we could discuss a shift in perception, but even that, I actually sort of came back over the sentence and said that even with my earlier films, I was sometimes invited in festivals that had a specific LGBT focus, and then sort of more universal general festivals. But I feel that maybe this way of conceptualizing categories on the thematic of the film's content is perhaps something that exists more in American cinema than in French cinema, where I feel like we were kind of submerged in the general production.
Because you guys are smarter, huh? No, that's great. Thank you.
Non, mais c'est intéressant que vous dites. Je ne sais pas si c'est mieux d'ailleurs parce que c'est aussi.
Sure it's a good thing.
Parce que c'est aussi une manière de ne pas reconnaître pour le coup l'identité queer ou LGBT de certains films. Vous voyez, c'est-à-dire qu'en France, c'est vrai qu'on a une espèce comme ça de tradition philosophique universaliste très très forte et qui impose quelque chose comme ça dans l'ensemble de la culture, hein, que ce soit au cinéma, en littérature et on voit bien aussi que c'est une manière d'invisibiliser aussi, dans un sens, la question sexuelle, en tout cas dans les œuvres d'art. Donc c'est pour ça, je ne sais pas, ça ne veut pas dire qu'en France on soit plus ouvert. Au contraire, je pense que c'est, en tout cas, ça peut être à quelque chose, oui, qui parfois peut se retourner contre l'identité même des films.
I'm not sure it's such a good thing because it can also serve to invisibilize the identities of the film. I think in France we do have a very strong heritage of a certain philosophical tradition which is universalist in every domain and every form of art and sort of broader than that. So to say that is necessarily something to be cherished is not so sure. It can turn back against the film itself and the film's identity.
Yeah, interesting. Georden, I am going to ask you the same question, but also you are dealing in archive as well. So, and I'm a documentary filmmaker, so I am curious how maybe this question, in your field and in the way that you're looking at archive and the way we're seeing LGBT queer stories in the archive Like, how have you seen that change, shift, or just comment on that?
Yeah. And so the question, just to mirror back this question, it's like about a niche versus universal appeal of queer stories.
People are taking it wherever, which is
Okay,
great.
cool.
But it's about really representation. Like, is this something that
Yeah.
now queer LGBTQ representation is just part of our cinema, part of our cinematic world? Is it something that's niche? Is it, you know, how has it shifted or changed? How have you seen it shift and change? And how does, and I'm just specifically asking in terms of the archive too.
Yeah. I mean, not to be too alarmist, but, you know, like 4 out of 10 people in the United States think that non-binary and trans rights are changing and our society is adapting too fast to these people. So it's like, you know, it's a pretty, I think, politically, I'm being alarmist.
Well, it's also true. We're seeing an assault.
Yeah. Like
Yeah.
we're in a, I think,
Retraction.
nationally in a place where we're experiencing pretty nefarious biopolitical and necropolitical warfare on different bodies. So I think that these stories are really valuable and really important. And of course, we need more of them. And of course, working in archives, you're constantly asking the question, who has the privilege to be recorded in history? And when we think about history, it's like history is what survives the shipwrecks of judgment and chance. It's not just when you look through an archive, you shouldn't expect to see everyone is not equally represented in that space. There's a lot of silence. And so looking at, you know, I worked within the History Project, which is a Boston LGBTQ archive. So looking at, you know, brick and mortar gathering spaces, which are disappearing across the United States, it's also a global issue. It's like, where do queer people go to gather when, you know, governments are intervening, when we have a history of urban renewal, and even looking through the archives, there's so much that's not there, just because you couldn't be recorded and keep your job. Going to a gay bar. You didn't want to be photographed there. You weren't going to include your oral history. And so, you know, going through and kind of really only getting the contours of what an existence looked like and having to imagine what exists in those gaps was something that we worked really hard on doing, is like what exists in those silences.
Can you just describe your film a little bit so people...
Oh, okay. It's wild.
Yeah, that's why I asked you to describe it.
Yeah, so it reimagines the Playland Cafe, which would have been Boston's oldest gay bar had it survived the turn of the century. Downtown Boston, up until the 1980s, 1990s, used to resemble Times Square. And has anyone here been to Boston? I know that New York thinks of Boston as like its ugly suburban sibling. But like it really used to, I know. I love Boston. But downtown now, you know, it's Starbucks, it's Chase Bank, it's institutions, and that is on purpose. And so I think looking at the fate of Boston in regards to government intervention is, you know, a warning sign for not what could happen, but what is happening across the United States, what has happened. So to me, it served as a beautiful microcosm. And the film I'm not really interested in patrons. Anyone here ever work in a bar? Yeah. Patrons are the worst part of a bar, like the worst. So we're really looking at the service industry. What does it mean to be a steward of a queer space? What does it mean when that's the only job you can find and the only job you can maintain? This is your livelihood. So I worked in a gay bar myself. Patrons are fine, as long as y'all tip. So yeah, it's really that perspective.
And what you do, if I may say, is use stylized, not reenactments, but stylized scenes.
Yeah.
And then intercut with archive.
Yeah.
And I'm curious, especially, you know, coming from the documentary world,
Love it.
how you constructed, did you have these stylized scenes before and then the archive, or the archive dictated what the scenes were?
I think it's a little bit like a kintsugi process, you know, like you're filling in the gaps with gold, sort of. energy. But we looked at a specific archive that was our entry point, of a drag queen named Sylvia Sidney, and she was known as the Queen Bitch of Boston. And she was mean. She was really mean. But she, you know, gave such beautiful testimony and such beautiful oral histories, and she like robbed a bank in drag, and then all of her exploits would end at this particular bar, which was the Playland Cafe. So we really took some parts of her life, but it was an amalgamation of archive reenactments, like, and also my experiences working in that sort of space as well.
Right.
Yeah.
Awesome. I want to talk a little bit about the casting of your films, because I thought all of the performances were really quite amazing. Vuk, I'm going to start with you. Can I ask if this film was somewhat autobiographical?
Yeah, I mean, you just did, but
Or you could say I don't want to answer that, but
yeah, it's inspired and part of my life for sure. It's not like a shrink session that I created to like get through trauma, but it is a mirror of parts of my life and people in my life. And more than anything, it's a mirror of my fears. I try to understand through making this movie why society was afraid of me coming out as trans and why my parents really didn't want that to happen. So I think it's, in that sense, it is very, yeah.
And there's also the relationship with the ex-boyfriend.
Yes.
And that's something that I had never seen.
That's the most like real part of it.
The most what?
The most like real
part of it.
Yeah. I just premiered at Berlinale, and my ex that's based on lives in Berlin, and went to see it, and we had dinner, and it was weird.
Amazing.
It was great. It was great.
It was just weird.
But
Talk more, just a little bit about that sort of understanding. I mean, I won't give away the plot points, but this is a real like deep relationship that they're grappling with and trying to understand where they are and attraction and what that means. Can you just talk about that? Because I thought it was super interesting.
Thank you. Yeah. So the what you're asking about is a relationship between a trans man and their ex-boyfriend, who is a cis straight man, and they had dated when the trans man was in the closet presenting female. So I was just very interested. For me, I think, and for a lot of trans people, the idea of desirability and wanting to be loved is very much a fear when you're coming out. So I wanted to explore what remains. Like, if you fall in love and the person comes out as trans, like, are you still in love with that person? Right? Is love defined by gender?
Right.
So that's kind of what we explore through that relationship. But I also really wanted to stress that the past mistakes of a trans person aren't deleted as soon as they come out.
Right.
You know, that I think the most human thing you can do, and something that happens in the movie, is they're held accountable for how shitty they were in their past, especially in a romantic sense.
Yeah.
So that was just something I really wanted to explore. And you were asking about casting, so I'm just going to answer, if that's okay.
Yeah, how did you find your main actor?
Well, first I'm going to say the person playing the ex-boyfriend is actually played by a gay man, which is something I really wanted to do. I'm a little tired of only straight people being able to play gay men, so I wanted to switch it up and have a gay person play a straight person. Also, I think it was a very good thing to do for the trans actor to feel secure and to explore, because there are some scenes in it that are a little bit, could go either way. It's kind of dangerous but sexy. So it was great to have a queer person there helping us navigate that and creating a safe space. And then casting the lead was a really hard journey, because not only did it took 5 years to make this movie, it took about 2 years to find the lead.
Wow.
Because I was not only looking for a trans masculine person, I was also looking for a mixed race, like a half Latino. The other half could be anything, but half Latino trans person. So it's very niche. And, it was me reaching out to my community and asking colleges, Instagram blasts, acting classes, and compiling a list of about 120 names, which was a lot of non-actors. So I have like this very beautiful, weird, brave map of America, and they're trans men who wanted to do this and found Leo, who was pretty interesting, because he's told me many times that had he tried to be cast for this 2 years ago, he wouldn't have been right, because he himself had not come out or gotten top surgery. So just a very, pretty zeitgeisty thing to try and cast a trans actor right now, a trans masculine actor.
Was this their first film?
This was their first film as a
feature.
lead. Yeah, they'd done some shorts, some TV, but this was like their first for sure, and the first character that they could play that was very in line with who they are.
Great.
Yeah.
Yeah. Great. Thank you. In Florent, in your film, I thought that the way drag was universal, right? In terms of people's attraction to it. Even the girlfriend, the ex-girlfriend, has a drag moment, which I love. So talk about that. What is drag? How is drag universal? What does it mean to be a drag performer for anyone? Oh. And you even have one of your characters say it. They could be gay, straight, non-binary.
It's a huge question. You are asking me to try to define how drag is universal.
Well, if that was part of what the film was trying to say.
It is. You are right,
Yeah.
but it's difficult to put it in words. But
try.
it is my feeling. It's a very accessible art, which brings a lot of joy. And for example, as you mentioned, I am a drag queen. I have my own cabaret in Paris once a month. And the audience is very mixed. We have LGBTQ people coming, but also heterosexual couples and families and kids. And actually, France struggles in some places right now with drag queens giving readings to kids.
Like us here.
Yes, like
Yeah.
here, which is like crazy. But my experience is that every people coming to our shows have an instantly connection with us, and I think it's because of the freedom that we are sharing on stage. The best compliment I got as a drag queen was I was so amazed by your work that I didn't want to do drag myself, but I wanted to feel as powerful and free as you seem to look on stage. And I think this is what drag does to artists, drag artists, and to the audience. And in that way, I would agree with that idea that it is universal. Yeah.
And freedom. I love that.
And power.
And
And yeah,
power,
it's
yeah.
very empowerment, of
Yeah.
course. Mm-hmm.
Which is why they're trying to stop it. These other, reactionary
Yes,
forces.
yes.
Yeah.
It's too dangerous.
Yeah, too dangerous, exactly, for everybody to be free, right? Talk about your casting. I thought, again, the performances were great. The main, what's the main guy's name?
Baptiste?
Baptiste, yes.
Yeah.
The girlfriend. I mean, I thought they were all great. How
Thanks.
did you find? And then Cookie Cunty.
Cookie Canty, yeah, my muse. I wrote the movie for them, for the drag cast, so I
You knew them before.
I knew them all,
Yeah.
and there is a great connection with Cookie and me. So Cookie is the main drag queen in the movie. I wrote 3 short movies for her, and she played in it. And the character of Cookie is kind of a common recreation now, because she created her own character 7 years ago, but she let me borrow it and rewrite it and to inject fiction into it for my movies. So it finally became kind of a common creation. And also, she was the first one to invite me on her stage as a drag queen, and I was the first one to invite her into my movies. So we have a great sharing experience in the domain of art. So yes, the movie was written for all the drag cast, and I had to find Baptiste, so the guy falling in love with the queen, and his girlfriend. His girlfriend is played by a very famous French actress who is Afsia Herzi. She was a dream cast for me, and I just mentioned her name, saying I could never get her to accept, and finally she did. So I was really happy with that. Yeah. And Baptiste, he was the only one I didn't have anyone in mind. So we had to go through a casting process, and I finally picked Pablo Poli, who was kind of the new guy in the troupe, and it was a great experience to meet him. Yeah, simply.
Awesome. Christophe, you have made many films and many other works in other genres. But my understanding, and it certainly seems from the film, that this is your most personal work. Why this film now? Why did you have to make this film now? And I'll just say a little bit about the film too, about a young boy, gay boy, whose father dies, and the grief that the family is undergoing for this untimely, because of this untimely death. I think that.
Oui, quand ce film est sorti, en fait, comme je l'ai dédié à mon père et que j'avais juste avant fait une pièce de théâtre en fait, où je parlais aussi déjà un petit peu de ça, etc. Et le caractère a priori autobiographique du film semblait plus flagrant que dans d'autres films. Même si moi, finalement, je trouve qu'un film comme Les Chansons d'amour était aussi personnel et que j'ai un rapport à l'autobiographie au cinéma qui est assez méfiant. Je crois pas trop à l'autobiographie au cinéma. Enfin, c'est pas que j'y crois pas trop, mais je serais pas contre en fait d'être un peu plus précis sur le mot qu'on peut mettre ça, et je préfère le mot d'autoportrait au mot d'autobiographie au cinéma.
So it's true that because the film is dedicated to my father, and because I had just staged a play right before that also dealt with this period, there seems to be a recognition that this film would be more blatantly autobiographical than others, even though I feel that I have made a number of personal films. Maybe Love Songs, for example, for me is a very personal film. And I have to say that I'm a bit suspicious of autobiography in cinema. I would want to be kind of more precise with the terms employed and speak of a self-portraiture.
Et j'aime bien ce mot d'autoportrait en fait, parce que c'est vraiment cette idée de qu'est-ce qu'on projette de soi en fait dans les films qu'on raconte, et comment à un moment on se choisit une incarnation, alors qui peut être sur un personnage, mais qui peut être aussi sur la conduite du récit, qui peut être sur le système de référence esthétique en fait qu'on choisit pour un film, et c'est pas moins personnel finalement que le récit, on va dire. Genre là, dans Winter Boy, qui reprend effectivement une sorte de récit comme ça, un petit peu personnel de faits qui me sont arrivés durant mon adolescence.
And the reason that I like the idea of portraiture is because I'm interested in thinking about which parts of ourselves we project onto and into our movies. And this can be as much something that happens through one character, as through a general narrative, as through a system of aesthetic references, which to me is no less personal than the reproduction of a sequence of facts that sometimes has also occurred in experience.
How did you find your young lead, who is really great as well?
Qui s'appelle Paul Kircher. Voilà, c'est un truc de casting. Ce qui comptait en tout cas vraiment pour moi, c'est que quand j'ai commencé à parler à mon producteur de ce film, je lui ai dit que je voulais mener en parallèle l'écriture du scénario et le casting. Et donc pendant à peu près 2 mois, j'allais régulièrement l'après-midi rencontrer des jeunes gens. Je crois qu'on a vu pas loin de 300 jeunes gens, et le matin en général j'écrivais le scénario, et ça m'aidait beaucoup en fait d'avoir comme ça une espèce d'alternance entre des conversations que je pouvais avoir avec des jeunes gens qui venaient passer le casting et l'écriture même du scénario. Et à un moment, voilà, comme tout casting, en fait, ça se resserre sur 3, 4 personnes. Et puis après, c'est une sorte de pari. C'est-à-dire que, oui, à un moment, vous choisissez quelqu'un parce que vous vous sentez à l'aise avec lui, parce que vous avez l'impression de bien communiquer avec lui. Mais la vraie révélation, en fait, pour moi, en tout cas, elle a eu lieu sur la première semaine de tournage, où là, je me suis aperçu, en fait, de la force et de la... Et de la manière dont mon imaginaire, on va dire, pouvait coexister très fort avec son imaginaire à lui.
So his name is Paul Kircher, and the way that something that I asked my producer very early on is that I wanted the writing process of the script to happen in parallel to the casting process. And so I would kind of alternate. We saw somewhere around 300 young men, and I would tend to write in the morning and then go through the castings, and the kinds of conversations that I was having with these people that were coming in to cast was an important sort of back and forth with the creative process itself. And as in any casting, eventually, you get to a sort of short list of 3 or 4 people, and then you just have to take a bet, and you do that based on what your comfort and communication is with that person. For me, the real revelation of Paul Kircher's strength and ability to for his imagination to coexist with mine only happened in the first week of actually working together.
Great, and of course you have the great Juliette Binoche in the film as well.
Ouais, bon, ça c'est plus facile en fait, parce que du coup, oui, les acteurs connus en fait que vous invitez dans vos films, j'allais dire, c'est presque plus du casting en fait, c'est autre chose, c'est un moment en fait, une espèce d'harmonie comme ça. C'est pas une harmonie, mais enfin dans le sens musical, je veux dire, vous essayez de vous dire ce serait bien d'avoir tel genre d'instrument qui pourrait jouer avec tel autre genre d'instrument, et donc forcément sur des acteurs connus, ça passe par l'amour, l'admiration que vous avez pu projeter sur d'autres films où vous avez vu ces gens, et plus d'ailleurs toujours pour moi que, enfin, j'ai jamais aucune idée des personnages en fait avant de commencer un tournage, mais c'est vraiment plus, oui, comme on choisit des couleurs. Ça paraît très vaniteux de dire ça. C'est pas grave.
Well, that's much easier. I think that with famous actors, I almost wouldn't consider it a casting process anymore. It becomes a question of creating a harmony, but almost in the musical sense, as though you were choosing between different kinds of instruments. And because you have their filmography to refer to, of course, you're just guided by the love and admiration that some of their performances solicited in you. And so it's less about having an idea of what a character is going to be like than choosing a color.
Beautiful. I'm going to just open it up to see if there's any questions from the audience.
Winter Boy.
Winter Boy. Yep. And tell us again, maybe say again where folks can see everyone can see the film. That's probably...
Winter Boy is playing tomorrow night at 6:15.
6:15 here.
Yes, in the Walter Reed Theatre.
And 3 nights a week is showing tomorrow too at 3:15. Thank you.
And Vuk, again, where's
So sorry.
New directors, new films here at Lincoln Center in MoMA, April 8th and 9th. And I'll be there.
And Georden, what about you?
I'm not allowed to say, but we may be back later.
Stay tuned. Any other questions?
I saw Winter Boy yesterday. I really loved it. As I was walking out, this like quasi-straight, quasi-liberal couple behind me said, "Oh, it was just too graphic. I don't care if it's heterosexual or homosexual, but it's so graphic." And the idea of calling a film graphic is like hypocritical, weird. But is that, is that a valid criticism, and is it something you get in France? And as filmmakers, how do you deal with that, or you just ignore it because it's stupid?
I think France, they're used to more sex on screen. Right.
Forbidden in America, but
Yeah.
still, we're bothered.
En fait, la question, c'est de savoir si les scènes sont trop explicites.
Non, et comment vous, quelle relation vous avez avec le fait d'avoir des scènes explicites?
Oui, bah, c'est toujours le cas, mais je sais pas comment dire ça. C'est la représentation en fait de la sexualité, de l'érotisme en fait est toujours un problème. C'est toujours un problème. En tout cas, c'est toujours quelque chose qui finit par créer des rejets dans la réception. Et c'est vrai que sur ce film-là, comme en fait le personnage est jeune, Alors l'acteur a 20 ans quand on a fait le tournage. En fait, on a fêté ses 20 ans, mais il joue un personnage qui a 17 ans. Se pose toujours la question un petit peu de du regard qu'en tant que metteur en scène, en fait, vous portez dans la mise en place et la représentation de ces scènes sexuelles. Et il est certain que quand ces scènes sexuelles sont plutôt de caractère homosexuel, il y a vite des soupçons qui se portent en fait sur la nature même de votre regard à vous en tant que cinéaste.
So it's always going to happen. There's always, sexual and erotic representation always leads to some form of rejection and is a sort of problematic a problem, leads to problems in the reception for some people. It's true that it's specific in this case. The actor was turned 20 on set, but he is playing a 17-year-old. And so for that reason, the question of the gaze of the filmmaker does impose itself differently. And it's true that it seems that whenever the erotic scenes are homosexual, this question seems to arise with more suspicion still in terms of what kind of gaze the filmmaker is having in the staging and the writing of these scenes.
Great, thank you. Other questions? And if you can wait for the microphone, I'm sorry, I was told that audience needs to have a microphone.
Thank you. And thank you all so much for being here. I guess I sort of want to follow up on that question. As someone who grew up with a very Francophile father, I was lucky to go through adolescence watching lots of queer identities on screen, and that was thrilling for me as a queer person growing up watching American films where it didn't show up. So I'm curious as much. So for our two American filmmakers, is there a way that you see your film? Are there French films that have inspired you? What do you see the connection with French filmmaking in how much queer identity has been portrayed for decades on screen very differently than we've seen queerness or drag in films as often as the butt of a joke for so many decades?
Do you mind if I go first? Okay. I think for me, the guiding principle that I work around is like I have a general pushback against this. When we say universal, I'm like, throw that in the trash, because at least for me, Fred Moten is like a guiding light of like the anti-normative precedes the normative. So just trying to center the fringe communities as not versus a normative culture, but the primary. The centrifugal force. But I would say I have been really influenced by, of course, the work of Derek Jarman, Barbara Hammer, looking to moving image history as like a queer person looking for other queer bodies, of course, moving on screen. But I would say in regards to the casting process, Lady Bunny is in my film, and she's so scary. She's lovely and wonderful, but one of the things that we did in trying to cast her, because she was one of our first casting, we didn't even audition. I was just like, it's got to be Lady Bunny, as someone who's so part of the visual culture and the visual history. She's a Warhol darling, and being able to connect to that. But one of her, I think, concerns about the film was that we would make fun of her. She's so used to being brought in as a comedic plot point. So to really, demonstrate to her and show her not only on set, but in the script as well, that this is going to be her getting to show her acting chops was something that was of extreme value to assisting us with the casting process and assisting her in being on set and feeling comfortable and knowing that this wasn't just like Lady Bunny. She's funny. And she'll read you to filth, which I learned. But so interesting to direct her, and like what a beautiful challenge, too. But I guess for me, it's I'm not sure in regards to like French cinema, or rather it's just like the idea of like anti-normative identities in moving image as more of like a global approach. Yeah.
Great, thank you.
I mean, it's a hard question. I think because I guess I'm trying to answer this through like trans masculinity, and that's actually something that I don't really see on screen. But when it comes to like French cinema, I just adore a movie like Stranger by the Lake, which is just, it's as explicit as you can get, and just the idea of freedom that we don't really have in the States. And I think not French at all, Canadian French, but Xavier Dolan for me was a very powerful director to grow up with, watching his portrayal of just love through the queer lens and transness and gayness. But I don't know, I think actually someone like Silas Howard or John Waters are American filmmakers that I would look towards and feel comfortable or feel comfort watching their movies. Yeah, I'm not really answering, I'm just rambling. But
No, influences. Thank you. Question over here?
This is pretty much part B of the question. It's for the two French directors. I'm from a small Florida town. I'm from a small Florida town, so I'm playing catch up with French cinema. So, what are some of the movies that movies or movie makers in France that I should watch that influenced you? Merci.
So you want to know names of directors or
Yes,
directresses?
movies you should watch that influence you.
French
Yes.
who influenced us. Okay, the funny thing is that one of them is sitting right next to me. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. But it's true because you mentioned love songs, and love songs it was one of the main movies influencing my work. So if you haven't seen it, I hardly recommend you to see it. You should look at Céline Sciamma's movies too, like Tomboy, or recently Portrait of a Young Lady in Fire,
Yes.
which is absolutely amazing. So Céline Sciamma is someone to look forward to.
Je sais pas, non, moi j'irais chercher chez les plus vieux que nous. En France, en fait, je sais pas, quelqu'un comme Vecchiali, je dis ça parce qu'en plus il est mort très récemment. C'est un cinéaste homosexuel qui a été très important parce que très militant et très courageux pendant des années. Et il a fait un film qui est vraiment sublime, qui s'appelle Femme, Femme, qui est un film qui a énormément influencé Pasolini. Donc je vous dirais d'aller voir de ce côté-là. Et sur les représentations homosexuelles, malgré tout, c'est difficile de ne pas parler de Jacques Demy. Jacques Demy est à la fois un grand cinéaste homosexuel dissimulé, caché, puisqu'il n'a jamais parlé ouvertement de son homosexualité. Mais tous ses films sont des grands films queer parce que c'est des grands films de travestissement. C'est-à-dire que on voit bien que tous les personnages féminins dans les films en fait de Jacques Demy sont en fait des hommes et donc je pense que c'est peut-être le plus grand cinéaste queer. C'est déjà un des plus grands cinéastes du monde pour moi, Jacques Demy. Mais je dirais que voilà, là il y a quelque chose de très français, de très queer, de très particulier dans la filmographie de Jacques Demy.
So I would say to go and look in the generation before us, maybe in the direction of Vecchiali, who died recently and who was a very courageous and very politically active filmmaker, whose film Woman, Woman was a big influence on Pasolini's work. And then, of course, Jacques Demy, who is one of the most important filmmakers in general for French cinema and maybe the history of cinema, as well as being a gay filmmaker who was closeted, or at least his homosexuality is not something that was ever openly discussed, but his films are profoundly queer because they're always about a form of dissimulation and shape-shifting. Most of the great women characters in his films are actually men, and so for his importance in both queer cinema and cinema in general, I would advise to watch his.
Thank you. Other questions? I would like to ask each of you, what is next, either with your own film, with this film, or work that you're planning for the future? Let's start down here. Yeah.
Yes. What is next is a documentary. Because I am feeling like something has to change in my life, in my relationship with drag. Like it has taken a lot of space in my work and into my intimacy too, as I've been in a relationship with a queen for 3 years and a half. So I want to move from that, and I'm about to shoot a documentary about my last time in my cabaret. On stage.
Of your cabaret.
Yeah. So that will be a topic, and a feature about healthcare people, about the end of life, people taking care of old people with Alzheimer. Yeah. It will be the subject of my next long feature.
Beautiful. Thank you. Christophe?
Ce qui est venu juste après la sortie, en tout cas, de ce film Winter Boy, c'était une reprise d'une adaptation que j'ai faite au théâtre à la Comédie Française de Marcel Proust, Le côté de Guermantes. Et s'il y a bien un artiste queer en France, c'est Marcel Proust. Et j'ai écrit un nouveau film que j'espère tourner à la fin de l'été, voilà. Dont évidemment je ne vous dirai strictement rien.
So right after finishing Winter Boy, I started the rework of a theater adaptation that I have worked on at the Comédie Française, adapting Proust. And if there is one great queer artist in France, it's Proust. And I've also begun writing a new film, of which I will tell you nothing.
Rien. Okay. Vuk?
So I shot in September. I finished editing sound 2 days before jumping on a plane to go screen it at Sundance.
Wow.
So I'm still processing.
Yeah.
And as a mentor of mine said recently, enjoy the victory lap, which is also part of the filmmaking process, even though I'm having some, difficult feelings finishing something that took a while to make. But I have 2 scripts that I'm writing, and I think, like him, will tell you nothing, and just keep an eye out for, just more queer love and queer joy on screen.
Thank you.
Yeah, queer love, big thing. I'm writing a script, and starting to pitch that around. And then I also recently optioned Lost Boy, which is a BDSM retelling of Peter Pan set in Portland. So yeah, it should be fun. Yeah.
Awesome. I don't know what our time is, if we need to wrap up or... Well, we can continue the conversation, right? Exactly. Well, this has been wonderful. Thank you so much for the conversation. Thank you all.